Welcome to the new Rainmaker Podcast, a weekly show for visionary founders and team members alike to come together and share the heartfelt, the cringe, and the radically honest truths about what it's really like to build and work for some of the world's most exposed brands on the biggest internet stages. I'm your host, Veronica Romney, and after working for some of the biggest names in the online space myself, I've learned that it takes both leadership and dream team collaboration to truly scale a company to its greatest potential. You can build a business alone, but you cannot scale it on your own. And my goal on today's episode and every episode is to inspire our dreamers and empower our leaders. Make sure to follow and share my podcast with your friends and colleagues, and feel free to tag me on Instagram at vromney with your insights and ahas. Now let's make it rain on today's episode. Okay, Rainmaker Podcast, this is going to be a very special episode for so many reasons. One, it's deeply personal for me, so TMI alert. Number two, we're going to talk about intimacy. Yep, because us as business human beings and over-functioning, over-performing, overachieving, women, men, CEOs, yeah, that's going to have some effects on the bedroom life. So I'm actually bringing on one of my personal coaches to today's podcast, who is an expert in all the ways, who is not only helping me with my health, but is also helping me with my intimacy. And I'm in her intimacy program. So without further ado, and I already know if you're listening to it, you're not seeing the blushing, but I already know because I can feel red in the cheeks. This is just going to be one of those special ones.
We're going there today.
Please welcome Dr. Jordin Wiggins to the Rainmaker Podcast. Jordin, hey.
Veronica, hi. Thank you so much for having me. And I know everyone listening already knows this, but you are amazing. You blew my mind from our first conversation. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, it's a mutual admiration for sure. Why don't you do the thing? Why don't you formally introduce yourself to the Rainmaker community so that we can get that out of the way and dive right into all the good stuff?
So I'm Dr. Jordin Wiggins. I help CEOs and badass entrepreneurs be as amazing and fulfilled in the bedroom as they are in the boardroom. Basically, author, intimacy, and pleasure coach.
Yeah. But also doctor, I tell them like why you even got into this particular arena, because it's really a source from not helping women in this place, but helping them with everything else. Like just tell that story. I think it's important.
You're right. So how did we get here? Because like you said, this is not a topic that I woke up one day and was like, this is my mission. Well, I did, but I wanted to hide it for a really long time because there is so much shame around it, and it's stigmatized and taboo, and all of those things are changing. Like when Goop gets a documentary on Netflix about pleasure, like it's starting to become, oh, okay, we need to talk about this. And with sexless marriages on the rise and affairs and just all of this unfulfillment, it's a massive part of our health that we don't talk about. So I had hormonal imbalances, which presented as like depression and anxiety and really bad acne. And I mean, now we would call it PMDD, but I didn't have that diagnosis. I didn't have that language way back then. So I wanted to go into medicine to learn how to fix myself. And then I thought if I could do it for myself, I could do it for other women. Yeah. And getting answers in the system, it was just so hard to navigate. So I did a little pivot into naturopathic medicine, or a lot of, I think Americans call it functional medicine. So that I could open a women's health clinic. And I thought, this is my life's dream and my purpose and my goal. And you will laugh at this. I was thinking way back then, I'm going to make $100,000 a year and I'm going to help women and I'm going to live the life. It's actually so comical to think back. So then I would realize there was this question on my intake form, and I got it from one of my supervisors. So I didn't even write it myself. And I almost deleted it when I went to, like, you know, you open the doors, you get your sign, you do all your stuff. I almost deleted this question, but it was, how satisfied are you with your intimacy? And I almost deleted it. And I had this gut instinct, leave it in. Leave it in. And I saw patient after patient. And initially my practice was pretty general, but it ended up being very niched into the health of extremely successful women is what I ended up seeing primarily. So the door would shut and then women would open up.
Oh, yeah.
And they would say, I don't have desire. I have pain with sex. I can't orgasm. I can't stay present. I'm thinking about my to-do list. I'm thinking about emails I have to send. I'm thinking about the employee I have to fire. Like just this litany of concerns around sex and having nowhere to go for answers, which was interesting because it was also reflecting my own experience. Because, so on top of when my mental health and my hormones were off, like, of course, you don't want to be intimate at those times. Yeah. Or if they're off the other way, then you really do. It could give you increased arousal, which is fine. It's just, I started to like research on my own, like what's going on with me. Oh, yes. And I also had, in my early 20s, when I was doing my medical, like my residency, I had a cyst operated on in my vagina. They're very common, like 25% of women have them. But again, shame, we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And essentially to repair it, like they stitch you and everything. So it's like an episiotomy. But there's no care, there's no explanation, there's no nothing. So I also started to have pelvic pain at that point, and pain with sex and pain with orgasm. So while I was silently researching in the background for myself on how do I solve this problem, then all of my patients were saying, help, help. Yeah. And then I realized, oh, it's not just me. And research says that 50% of women will suffer from sexual dysfunction at some point in their lifetime. So to me, that's a massive, massive pleasure problem.
50%, which is, here's the irony. I remember telling this to you the first time we met, because I met you at an event by Allie Brown, right, when she did it in Arizona. Yes. So I met you there for the very first time, having never met you or heard about you, or your book, your podcast, nothing. So I walk in and we're getting to know each other at the table, and that's where we met Tracy Litt. And I mean, like, it was just really fun, right? We all clicked really quickly, and it was a kinship immediately. But you're describing to the table what it is that you do and how you're working with all of these like powerhouse females. And I think at some point I looked at you, I'm like, so you pretty much look at us and you already know without us saying anything that we're not these like sexual goddesses that we like to think that we are. Like we're all struggling, and you're like, yep. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. I'm like, it's like, you know, you picture the audience in their underwear. I'm like, we pretty much like, you have supervision. You already know all of our deepest, darkest secrets that we don't disclose because the external persona is that we're crushing it in all the ways, but that doesn't always translate to the other quadrants of our life.
Yes. And it is. And I know because it was me too, and it still is me when I'm not practicing what I preach. So what I see a lot is, first of all, how we do things in the bedroom is how we approach them in life. The parallels are wild. I never would have known that before. But when you have a very high achieving, driven, people pleasing female, that's really masculine energy. And there's nothing wrong with it. I like to call that our superwoman. So we can have our cake, we can get shit done. If something goes wrong, I forgot. Should I not swear on this?
You can swear.
Okay. I guess I already said vagina.
Yeah. So. You be you. Yes.
Yeah. When things go wrong, you want her on your team. If she exits a company, they usually need to hire 2 people to replace her, right?
Yeah. I have Beyonce. I've named her. Her name is Beyonce, and she's a whole vibe. Yes, I know.
So in Chinese medicine, which is a part of what I studied for 4 years, we talk about the balance between yin and yang. And women, like we're in our yang, we're in our masculine with that like penetrating, driving, energy. And we can have sex in that state. And sometimes we can orgasm and that kind of like, sometimes women will even say to me like, yeah, it's not that bad. And other times women are like, yeah, I am not present. I'm just doing it out of obligation
or duty.
So there's this whole other world. There's this whole other way of experiencing life and intimacy, which women like us are resistant to. Like, you want to talk about surrendered, open, flowing, like words like that, and you see eyes start rolling. But surrendered sex, full body orgasm, full body pleasure is like, we need to be able to access the feminine energy, feminine characteristics to experience it.
Okay, I have so many things. So number one, Dr. Jordin is a genius. And by the way, I've been a part of other business groups, masterminds, whatnot, that had sex therapists or sex psychologists, or it's not that I haven't been around experts like you, but I think I resonated with you, or I was so attracted to your messaging and what you do, because the approach is you're embracing the femininity and that feminine part. And that really resonates with me. And it's true though, in the sense, and I've had many podcast episodes. I've had podcast episodes with Dr. Craig Patera where we talk about the internal family systems, and all of us are composed of many parts, just like that movie Inside Out for, those parents out there that love Disney. But like, so there's the Beyonce part of me, there's the V part of me, there's Veronica, there's Vito, which is in my family. Like, there's lots of parts, and I celebrate and I love all of my parts because all of them are for my good. So like that masculine, overachieving, let's take on the world, save, change, transform as many lives as I'm called to do. Like that, yes. And there's no part of me that wants to exile that or tell that part of myself that it's bad. But if that part overfunctions, then where's the feminine part that is in a place to receive and to be loved and cared for? So I'm raising my hands, 2 hands in the air. I've been operating in that place for a really, really long time, even through my marriage, through having 2 boys. Oh my gosh, the irony of that, right? Like, through so many things, because that is how one gets ahead in her career, gets ahead in life, all the things, right? That's what the world tells us, and that's what we feel like we must do.
And we've succeeded.
Yes, we do.
We've done a lot of things really, really well. That cape, that superwoman part gets us amazing success.
100%. Yep. 100%.
And the feminine energy, I see it as it's a both and. It's a complementary.
Yes.
And initially when I started doing this work, realizing, where is this actual pleasure problem? Why are we living in a society of people with anhedonia, which is the medical term for the inability to feel pleasure and joy? And I think that it's a massive, massive problem that we need to address. And a part of it's the way we were conditioned. And right, we know what we need to succeed in corporate or as an entrepreneur, and the skills that get us there. Mind you, the more I'm learning the both and, the more I'm learning that feminine creation, attracting, and again, I'm talking with action, with aligned action, right? I'm not sitting around, potions and fires all day, just or meditating all day, thinking that, oh, this is going to fall into my lap.
Potions.
And this is probably interesting, and it would probably be reflected in a lot of your listeners' lives. We really only start to address this when there's a problem.
Yep.
And the problem, I call it the superwoman crash. So you'll know yourself, like, things are going really good, and then the bottom falls out somewhere in health, wealth, or love. And with superwomen, it's not usually wealth. Like, we're not usually getting fired or making a bad investment or doing those things. It's usually with love or our health. And I see it all the time, and women work with me all the time. They're like, just had the best month ever. Their career is going amazing as ever. And then there's something that gives with their health. An accident, a recurring illness, and that crash is indicative that we don't have the balance between masculine and feminine in ourselves. And I'll give you a TMI on this one. So
spill the tea.
For me, I had my medical clinic, and then my $100,000 income goal I had expanded.
Yeah, times what? Yeah, 10x. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I was like, okay, 7 figures, have the house, have the car, married. Is this it? I was not fulfilled. And what my crash was there was my marriage. Everything happens for a reason, that kind of thing. But imagine me, so overworking, overgiving, seeing so many patients a day, like getting media and writing a book and doing all these things. And I'm in my masculine and I can't let my husband close to me. And even when I was approaching him, it was in that masculine penetrating CEO energy.
Like to-do list. Yeah.
Right. Which pushes him into the feminine pole. And are you attracted to a man in the feminine pole? Some women are, and that's cool, but it's not my thing.
Not my thing either. Yeah.
So it really eroded the dynamic in that relationship. And I didn't have the tools or knowledge that I have now to rebalance it. And it actually wasn't until I got into another relationship and the same patterns started happening that I was like, ooh, it's me.
I'm the problem. It's me.
And so then I closed my medical clinic. And this was over time, right? Like I had written my book and this, like with the Pleasure Collective, really started to take off. And I was called that this is what I wanted to do. And in your masculine logical brain, you're thinking, okay, you're going to leave like a fairly self-sustaining business that you built, but that was soul sucking in a way, to pursue a passion, like side hobby. Anyways, but I did. I love it. I'm so happy that I did it.
Well, I'm glad you did it because I'm being served by it, but continue.
So I have a daughter. She's amazing. Like so much good is going on. Then when I started to wean breastfeeding, my hormone imbalance reared its ugly head again. And I was getting, like, my PMDD was triggering something called cyclical vomiting syndrome. So I would get severe vomiting, need to hook myself up to intravenous fluids or get my butt to the hospital 3 times because in the last year. So like, that's the crash, right? So then it's like, career's amazing, love's amazing, health. So it's like every time we get what we say we want, if we are disconnected from our feminine energy, which I've just admitted to you has happened to me twice in my life, so I'm not calling you out, just saying I get it. If we cannot receive, something gives.
It has to. It has to. It has to. And I think about my own journey as well. By the way, thank you for your vulnerability and sharing that. It's one of my favorite things about working with you. Like when I'm like near tears about hair loss and the things that I'm dealing with, you're like, me too, sister, me too. And like, you send me pictures of your hair. And it just, and I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that when you're working with a provider who has empathetically walked the road, either before you or side by side with you. The God, like to be held in that way, or to be seen in like an acute pain that you only really know what it is unless you've gone through. It's like when a woman loses a child, like you really only know that pain when you personally have also gone through that pain. There's just some pain, some losses, some griefs that are unique or have a unique shading to them that only very few, unless you've taken that badge, would know. And so it's one of my favorite things about working with you, because you call me out, you tell me what to do. And then you also have by the way, I share this because this is what's interesting to me about the feminine and the masculine, and most really successful women suppress the feminine. And I'm raising my hand to say that you have, right? And if you're a very successful high achieving woman who's listening to this podcast, we know you're suppressing your feminine. So don't do that. Like, it's okay.
And we know you could be having better sex.
Yeah. Come to us. We know, we know. But what's interesting about feminine, masculine, when they are not in balance, to me, the opposite of that is either one's being suppressed or they're fighting, they're in conflict with each other, which is odd. But then when I also think about the attributes of true leaders, if you think of a phenomenal leader, they are an oxymoron at all times. It's a juxtaposition. It's paradoxical qualities. So like a really phenomenal leader is equal parts open and certain, kind and empathetic, but firm and constructive, right? Like and same thing in parenting. Like we have to be both for our children. We certainly have to be that way as a leader or steward over others, to have both parts, that these qualities against one another they seem paradoxical, they seem in conflict with each other, but really it's the possession of both in harmony that makes you better off in your service of others. And I think about that way in the work that you do too. It's not one is better than the other. Actually, both are required. Both are in service and in love for ourselves. And both, when they are not in balance, you are not your best self either. And that manifests in all the things that you talk about, which is like very validating for me in the journey that I've been on, just as an FYI.
It's a perfect juxtaposition of the work. And I couldn't agree more. And a lot of times as women, we think that we have to pick or check a box, right? Mom or CEO. And I know we've come such a long way in that, but it's like, even anytime I go to make a decision, it's like doctor or model. Like, can I be on the cover of a magazine in a bra? Or is that not allowed? So it's almost like we approach that too. Like, oh, if I'm feminine, if I'm celebrating, if I'm feeling joy, if I'm softening, if I'm allowing, if I'm doing all these feminine things, then I can't also be masculine and do and achieve and
yeah, they can't both be a part of your identity.
Yeah. And it's just such a false belief, and it really impacts intimacy.
Yes. We'll be back with this interview right after the commercial break. Did you know that I have a free Rainmaker hiring kit? Skip the formal recruiting process and learn how to source Rainmaker applicants that are already connected to you. I'll show you how to turn a walking testimonial into a rockstar team member for free. Head to veronicarami.com or click the link in my show notes to get your hands on the free Rainmaker hiring kit. Now let's get back to the show. Well, so I'll open up a little TMI here. But so I made 2023, I walked into this year, resolutions, goals. But for me, and this is something that I was even talking to my husband about this too, like as we were approaching the new year, I'm like, I really want 2023 not to be anything to do with the business, because I've worked so hard and so long in my business, in my career, in my professional pursuits, to know that if I'm not good, or if I'm not pushing myself, like me, like my wholeness, that everything is the fruit thereof. So like at some point I need to start working and just refocusing on my own soil, less on the produce. Right. And so I wanted 2023 to be a healthier for me for many reasons. But all the quadrants of health, right? Physical health. Yes, of course. Spiritual health, mental health, sexual health, health.
Yes.
Just health, but all the quadrants, and being radically open and vulnerable and all the things, because they're all related. They're all connected. You can't just, you can't just work on one thing and that not affect the other thing. So I've been trying to find this. My health journey has been, I've had, and Jordin already knows because she's working with me, but like, just so the people know, I've had hair loss. I've had body acne, which is really fun. No, it's not fun at all. Right. And it's a number of things. Night sweats, things like that. And mind you, my mother, when she was in her 30s, had debilitating migraines. So like I started to get nervous. I'm like, oh, am I going through the hormonal shift, tectonic plate, plates shifting in the 30s that my mother experienced? And so like I started to seek out, traditional doctors and then functional doctors. I'm like, this sucks. Like I was not getting anywhere. And it was really frustrating because it was only within the frame and the context of what they wanted to look at in their scope. So traditional medicine looks at a very particular way, functional medicine a particular way. I did the Chinese medicine. So like I think what's so cool about you is that you just kind of find truth in wherever truth can lie. And you're the curator of the things for us. And no one really talks about feminine and masculine energy on top of all of that. Right. So it's like, it's not holistic in its truest form, at least to me. What are your thoughts?
I had goosebumps when you said that, because I was guilty of this as well, especially earlier on in my career, being masculine about the approach to healing.
Yeah.
Which is like, I'm going to do the things, and I'm going to see the doctors, and I'm going to pay the money, and I'm going to do whatever, which again, we need to take the action. We need that piece. But I was only getting women so far. So they'd come to me with hair falling out or a hormone imbalance, like the migraines, really awful periods, like whatever the symptom was, mood, like high functioning anxiety and depression is something that I see frequently with women. And I coined feminine burnout as the term for the hair loss, the night sweats, the hormone imbalances, the mood shifts, all of those things, the sugar cravings. And what that is it's lacking the feminine energy. It's us lacking yin in its essence in Chinese medicine. So if that's a part of the problem, then how can we not also make it a part of the treatment?
Yeah, amen.
So I give these masculine protocols, right? And again, clinically, they were pretty brilliant. And I was always an outside the box thinker, because I do treat a little intuitively. It got me in massive trouble in my residency frequently, because they'd be like, well, why'd you choose a third line treatment? Justify this. Why didn't you use first or second? They're like, do you even know what first and second line treatment is? I was like, I don't know. It's just going to work. So I would get like X. So it would be so far, like, you know, the weight's coming off, my skin's clearing, my hair is growing back. Like I'd start to see the improvements in a lot of the physical stuff, but then there was still that lack of fulfillment. There was like, or maybe like the libido, the aliveness, that like eros, that erotic energy wasn't there. It didn't come back. Or they would feel amazing for like 6 months. I wouldn't see them again. They'd cancel an appointment because, you know, we're busy. And if you're feeling good, why
Go
keep
with it.
Yeah, exactly. And then they'd come back and they'd be like, oh, like, I don't know what happened. Like it's all back. And they'd stopped doing the things in pursuit of other goals in that. And again, brilliant women, smart women. They're like, I know what I should do, but I can't do it. I can't prioritize my pleasure. I have to earn my pleasure.
And, you know, this is what we've talked about. So this, again, my marketer brain goes into like overdrive because I'm like, okay, Jordin, listen, we have to make this is my marketing brain all the way. Like we have to make the persuasive argument that it's like the ROI that all of us say yes to in our businesses when we're evaluating different investments, groups, tactics, strategies, funnels, blah, 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 right? All of it's ROI, ROI, ROI. If you're working with these like high power functioning women who are high performers, then we got to make the case that like working on your femininity, embracing your female energy is a return on sex. They're like a return on pleasure. Cause like it has to, you're right. It's so funny because I'm even talking to you yet again. I'm like realizing even how we're going through my treatment plan. I told you, like it says on the paper, 80% compliance. I'm like, no, 100% compliance, 100% dairy free and gluten free. No, like I'm still even approaching, oh crap. I'm still even approaching my current treatment plan. FYI, I'm the problem. It's me with a masculine energy and drive because I want to control the outcome of this story.
And earlier in my career, I would have written 100%. But I learned that, and it's about desire and what do you want and what feels good. And if you're approaching it from this is making me feel amazing, I want to keep doing it, like truly, that's okay. But if we're approaching it from a way that creates more stress, and then we mess up our adrenals a little more, and then we mess up our sex hormones a little more. And the biggest problem that I see, and I remember when I was writing my book and doing all this research, just like any good superwoman would do, right? Because my opinion didn't matter. I needed to like have all the sources to back it up. When we're in, like when we have adrenal dysfunction, when we're in sympathetic overdrive, fight or flight, the pleasure centers in our brain are turned off. They've done MRIs. So even if your partner is approaching you, or even if something amazing happens in your business, you don't feel like celebrating. You don't feel like having sex because you want to run. You want to fight. You got to on to the next goal. You want to pull away from the touch because it's not as pleasurable as if you were in a parasympathetic nervous state. So when I make treatment plans, I try and take that into consideration, like giving that little grace or leeway, letting you lead with your intuition. So for example, before we get our periods, like in the luteal phase of our cycle, or especially the week before our cycle, especially if we have hormone imbalance, but just for any woman, it's natural to crave more easily digestible food and carbs. And it's something that we usually shame ourselves for. And we're like, no, I don't want to gain the weight, or I'm going to get inflamed or whatever. But we don't realize that the impact of that stress and shame and trying to avoid something that's natural does. Like there's a cost to being masculine and rigid about it.
Gosh. Okay. Again, I invited you to this podcast, and I only feel like it's fair to the listeners if I also just like, if I show my weaknesses or if I'm vulnerable, then I think it would encourage other women or leaders to feel vulnerable and seeking out help if this is you. One of the things that was, I'm still like relishing this huge epiphany that I had with you yesterday, FYI. So I'm dealing with hair loss, right? I'm dealing with hair loss. This is something, it started really bad hair loss with kids, which is very normal, you know, hormonal, just like, hello, having babies, you know, wreaks havoc on the body in so many ways. So now my youngest is 6. I'm like, so why do I have not my perfect situation? Like what I wouldn't say is great with my hair, right? But then, okay, let's bring my hair into the intimacy quadrant, because that's a health quadrant. I'm losing hair. I'm not happy with my hair. But let's take it into the intimacy quadrant. When I think of like really, really connected, emotionally present time with my spouse, when I visualize these moments, I always think of him touching my hair. And I think of like long hair as like really sensual and really feminine and beautiful. And like when I see women with long, beautiful, luscious hair, I'm like, oh God, like what if like the goddess within?
Yes.
They have these Pantene commercials, but like for reals. And so if I am experiencing and having shame around my hair, what happens? I don't want my husband to touch my hair. Because I'm like, I don't have one hair follicle that's like at any mercy of being lost.
I don't have any left to give.
Don't pull it. Like, don't touch it. I can't lose one more. You know, it's like human collateral damage, but it's like hair damage or collateral. And so the fact that I have shame around my hair in the health quadrant is now showing up in my intimacy quadrant, where I don't want my spouse to probably touch the one thing on my body that would actually be the healthiest for me, and to be really vulnerable, where I could receive him more as if he did lovingly like touch my hair, play with my hair, or give me a scalp massage, like, and I don't do it. So like, just, you understand, I share that. That's intimate and it's vulnerable on my part, but I share that because like I had no clue, no awareness how connected these things are. It might seem obvious if you're listening to it, but it wasn't obvious to me, and it hasn't been obvious to me until literally yesterday.
And I so appreciate you sharing that, because I'm hoping, like me saying, I'm divorced. I teach this stuff for a living, and I went to a whole new stratosphere of pleasure and joy, and now I'm puking. And like sharing that vulnerability will allow other women to also be vulnerable and seek the help that they need in this area, or help that they didn't even know they needed before hearing and seeing themselves in the story, because we're taught, right? I can do this. I can do it alone, and I can fix it. And I just need to do this, or I'll worry about this after this next quarter. Or, we do all the excuses to avoid this area because it's scary. We've been taught sex and pleasure is taboo, and this has been coming up for me a lot recently. Feminine nature is to desire and to want more. Like, I don't know, I've never met a woman that had a really great sex or a really great meal or anything really pleasurable, and she's like, okay, like, that's good. I'm good now. I'm satisfied. We're like, no, more. Which is why even we're more easily multi-orgasmic. Men can be too. They need to learn, but just it's more natural for us, right? So I think that desire for more, it almost scares women. Like, if I do this, like they're fearful of what's on the other side, but it's the fear that holds us back from having the sex, love, intimacy that we desire. So the question that's coming up for me, because I'm in this place where everything's great and I want more, more connection, more fulfillment. And I want a relationship where we're both willing to give up our stories and our rackets and actually have the lives that we say that we want. That it's not, oh, after this quarter, after this deal closes, whatever. That's like, we live it today. We start living it today. So I was asking myself, and this goes to you with your hair and the listeners, what are you willing to give up in order to have the life that you pretend you want?
Yeah. Ooh. Let that just sit and hang.
And some of us, it's a fear of pleasure.
Yeah. It's Pandora's box for many reasons.
It's a fear of having it all. It's a fear of, and I work with so many women that they're like, okay, well, I have all these things. I got the bags and the vacations and the car and the house. Like, do I also deserve good sex and intimacy?
Or, like I told you, one of the big ahas that I had was because we've been so conditioned that all good things are earned, like by the sweat of thy brow, you're good. Like, right. We earn our things. I earn my grades. I earn my achievements. I pride myself on not, that's why I like society so hard on like Nepo baby, or what is it called? Nepto babies, like the nepotism. Like, so like we celebrate those that weren't given an unfair advantage, and we celebrate hard work and grit and all of the things. And it's usually done with like a layer of speed. So 30 under 30, like there's a lot of that going on where you have to earn your way and then you're celebrated for those things. But that can also translate to intimacy where like I have to earn good intimacy. I remember being on a call with you, and I texted my husband. I was like, I don't have to earn this. I deserve this. And he was like, amen. He's like,
I'm not sure what you got going on, but I'm happy about it.
No, he's just like, yeah, that's what I've been saying this whole time, But it's interesting when you work with people who are extremely, it's part of our identity. I pride myself on my grit, my work ethic. I'm a daughter of Cuban immigrant parents who started a business out of nothing, escaping on communism, like my whole story and narrative. And this is mine and you have yours. Everybody who's listening has a story, has a narrative, has identity that's baked into how you were raised and the stories we tell ourselves. So like, if that's one of your values is how hard you work and how you earn your things and, like how pragmatic and resourceful you are, that can then translate to something that is not earned, but is deserved. And that in and of itself was a massive epiphany that you gave me too. So thank you for that one.
You're welcome. And to make that one concrete, you're earning your pleasure if sex is the last thing on your to-do list. That it's like, ooh, I just need to make sure that everything's in order in the house and this whatever deadline is met, that kind of thing. it is that ingrained belief that work hard, then play hard. And the problem is that our to-do lists are never ending. So pleasure, and that can be sexual pleasure, like pleasure in and out of the bedroom. That's why I like pleasure. Like we feel like we have to earn feeling good. We feel like we have to earn love by over functioning for our loved ones. And it ends up like the cost is feminine burnout. So health, wealth, or love, like something gives.
Something gives. Something always gives. Okay. You and I could talk, and we do. I'm obviously a part of our program. So like there's me, we're besties, but how can people see, like, where does one, besides working with you, which I highly recommend and endorse all the way through, this is a commercial, here it is. Like I would love all the things I tell people about you probably almost every other day on a weekly basis.
Thank you.
I gave you a shout out in my email too. I'm like, I'm part of an intimacy program. Email me if you want a referral. And it was like, all of them were like, what's the intimacy thing? So I'm happy. I mean, I'm now introducing you very formally into my world because I couldn't endorse you more than I do. But where does one begin? Besides getting a hold of you, and you can tell people where they can get a hold of you, where would you also advise them to like start?
My podcast, the Pleasure Principles podcast, or my book, The Pink Canary, depending on what's your thing. Tons of info on everything that we talked about there. All things pleasure, sex, connection, intimacy, and with like for us, right? Because just the generic sex advice out there doesn't work. And if you want to get in contact with me, you can send me a DM on Instagram at Dr. Jordin Wiggins, Jordin with an I.
Yeah. And we'll do all the links and everything. So to make it easy for the listeners, but I just want to say thank you in all the layers. Thank you for being on this podcast as a phenomenal guest. Thank you for being someone who is now in my inner circle, helping me with some of my most vulnerable hardships, which is like things that feel out of control for me, which is hard. Thank you for holding space and calling me out and being like the perfect coach in all the ways. And just thank you for going through all of this really hard stuff for yourself. So, and then more importantly, turning it around to help other people, which can be re-traumatizing sometimes, or it can be recharging in some ways, but you're doing that for us. And I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for all your kind words. I need to let those land and receive them. And thank you for having me and not having me censor myself and be able to share this message for those that need to hear it.
Anytime. We'll do a part 2. Well, give me 6 months and we'll do a part 2.
An update.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Well, thank you, Dr. Jordin Wiggins, for being on today's Rainmaker podcast. Thanks for listening to the Rainmaker podcast. We believe you can't get real results or have real relationships that last without being real first. If you resonated with today's episode, leave us a review so we can keep serving up the truth and tips that help you become the empowered leader that I know that you are. And always head over to veronicarami.com to check out all the free resources I have for you and the show notes from this episode. Until next time, my friends.